The knife was already in her hand when the farmer looked up from the wheat. Ragesh Ironblood crouched in the shadow of the stone wall bordering Tobias Talbot's north field, close enough to smell the sweat and sun-warmed dust on his shirt, close enough that one clean throw would end him before he ever knew she had come. The contract had been simple. A merchant with old grudges and deep pockets in the coastal town of Saltmere had paid good silver to see the fur trader dead, and Ragesh had taken jobs like it 100 times before without a flicker of hesitation. She was Ironblood. She did not hesitate. She hesitated. He was on his knees in the dirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, murmuring something to the wheat as though it could hear him, running his broad, calloused hand along a bent stalk like a man checking a wound on a friend. The low sun caught the gold in his brown hair and the tired, decent lines of his face, and for one strange, suspended heartbeat, Ragesh Ironblood, warband raider, feared blade of 3 clans, felt her arm refuse to move. Then his head turned and he saw her. Most men would have screamed. Most men, seeing an orc woman rise up out of the shadow of their own field wall, 7 feet of muscle and leather and old scars, a knife balanced in her hand like it belonged there, would have run, or fainted, or fumbled for a weapon they did not know how to use. Tobias Talbot went very still, the way a man goes still when he has already decided that running will not save him, and he looked at her with a kind of open, searching curiosity that made her hand tighten on the knife instead of loosen it. "You are not here to buy grain," he said. His voice did not shake. That surprised her more than anything. "No," Ragesh said. "Are you going to kill me before or after I finish this row?" The question was so absurd, so calmly, stupidly brave that she almost laughed. She did not laugh. Ironbloods did not laugh at their marks, but something in her chest, something that had gone hard and quiet a long time ago, shifted like a stone settling into new ground. "Get up," she said instead. Slowly. He got up slowly, brushing dirt from his knees, and stood in front of her in his plain homespun shirt and worn leather vest, a man of maybe 30 years, broad through the shoulders from years of hauling furs and packs, but with none of the swagger of a soldier. His boots were patched. His hands were rough. He did not reach for a weapon because, she would learn later, he did not own one worth reaching for. "Whoever paid you," he said, "I would like to know why. A man likes to know why he is dying." "Marsh Corliss," Ragesh said. "He says you cheated him on a shipment of marten pelts 2 winters past." Tobias Talbot's brow furrowed and something like real anger, quiet and controlled, moved behind his eyes. "I did not cheat him. He tried to pay me in coin he had shaved thin, and I called him on it in front of half the harbor. He has hated me since." He looked at her knife, then at her face, and something in his expression shifted from fear into something closer to weary resignation. "So he sent you instead of a magistrate. Corliss does not trust magistrates, he trusts silver." Ragesh turned the knife once in her fingers, an old habit, a warning she gave without thinking. "He trusts me. And should he?" The question hung between them in the gold evening light, over the bent wheat and the stone wall and the gulls crying somewhere beyond the rise toward the sea. Ragesh Ironblood had killed for coin since she was young enough to still believe her clan would take her back one day, since the day her own warband had turned on her and left her for dead on a mountain road, since she had learned that trust was a currency she could no longer afford to spend on anyone, orc or human. She had never once stood over a mark and asked herself whether the coin was worth the kill. She asked herself now. "Not yet," she said low. "Finish your wheat, farmer. I will decide by morning." She was gone into the tree line before he could answer, moving the way orcs of the old warbands were taught to move, silent as a held breath, and Tobias Talbot stood alone in his field with his heart pounding, staring at the place where a monster with sad eyes had disappeared, and found that he was not afraid so much as achingly, impossibly curious. She did not leave. That was the strangest part, and she knew it even as she did it. She should have gone back to Saltmere, told Marsh Corliss the job was more trouble than his silver was worth, and vanished down the coast road to find easier prey. Instead, she made a rough camp in the rocks above the farmer's land, close enough to watch his cottage and his barn and the low stone wall that marked the edge of his fields, and told herself she was only studying him, learning his habits, choosing her moment. She told herself that for 3 days. On the first day she watched him work from dawn until the light went violet over the sea, hauling water, mending fence, coaxing his one old mule into pulling a plow through soil that fought him at every turn. He worked like a man who had no one to help him, and had long ago stopped expecting anyone to offer. On the second day she watched him walk the mile down the cliff road into the fishing village that clung to the rocky harbor below his farm, and she watched the way the village folk nodded to him with a kind of guarded respect, the way the harbor master's daughter smiled at him, and he smiled back but never lingered, a man used to being liked well enough and loved by no one at all. On the third day, hunger got the better of her caution, and she made a mistake an Ironblood should never make. She stole a hen from his coop. He caught her before she cleared the tree line, the hen tucked under one massive arm, feathers already ruffled with indignation, and when he called out, "Wait," she should have run. Instead she turned because some foolish, unguarded part of her wanted to see his face again. "You could have asked," Tobias said. He was breathing hard from the climb, hands empty, no weapon, no fear either, only a kind of tired amusement that made her want absurdly to smile. "I would have given you a hen. I would have given you two. You did not need to sneak up on my coop like it was a fortress." "I do not ask," Ragesh said. "I take." "Well," he looked at the hen, then at her, and rubbed the back of his neck. "You are welcome to that one then. She is a poor layer anyway." A pause. "Have you decided?" "Decided what?" "Whether to kill me." Ragesh set the hen down. It scurried off toward the coop, indignant to the last. "Not tonight," she said, and turned to go, and stopped when his voice followed her into the dark. "There is stew," he said. "More than I can eat alone. If you are only going to sit up in those rocks and watch me anyway, you might as well not do it hungry." She looked back at him standing in his own doorway, lit gold by the lamp inside, offering food to the woman sent to kill him, and something in her chest ached in a way she did not have a name for. She did not go down for the stew that night, but she thought about it long after the lamp in his window had gone dark, and that frightened her more than any warband ever had. The days stretched into a week, and the week into 2, and Ragesh Ironblood told herself a dozen different lies about why she had not yet driven her knife into Tobias Talbot's chest. She told herself she was waiting to learn his patterns. She told herself Corliss's coin would keep. She told herself she was simply resting, that a warrior needed rest, that the rocky coast above his farm was as good a place as any to let old wounds close. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that she liked watching him work. There was something in the steadiness of him, in the way he rose before the sun and did not stop until long after it set, in the patient, unhurried way he spoke to his mule and his hens and the wheat itself, that reminded her of nothing in her old life at all. The war bands she had run with valued strength and cunning, and the sharp, quick violence of raids. They did not value patience. They did not value a man who knelt in the dirt at dawn to check whether frost had touched his seedlings, who mended his own boots by lamp light rather than buy new ones he could not afford, who gave half his catch of fish to an old widow in the village without ever once mentioning it to anyone. She learned that last part by following him, of course. She told herself that was only good tradecraft. On the 10th night, hunger and cold finally won the argument she had been having with her own pride, and Ragesh Ironblood walked down out of the rocks and knocked on Tobias Talbot's door. He opened it with a knife in his hand, a plain kitchen knife, more suited to peeling potatoes than fighting off assassins, and when he saw her standing in the lamp light with rain in her dark hair and her jaw set hard against the cold, he lowered it slowly and stepped back to let her in without a word. She had to duck to clear his doorway. Her shoulders nearly spanned it. She stood dripping on his floor, 7 feet of muscle in fitted leather armor scarred from old battles, tusks catching the lamp light, and Tobias Talbot looked up at her the way a man looks at a storm he has decided not to run from. "Sit," he said, Before you catch a chill and I have to explain to Corliss why his assassin died of a fever in my kitchen." The corner of her mouth twitched. It was the closest she had come to smiling in a long time. She sat. He fed her. It was the best meal she had eaten in years, not because the stew itself was fine. It was simple fare, root vegetables and salted fish and herbs he grew himself. But because no one had set a bowl in front of her and asked nothing in return since she had been a very young woman, before the betrayal that had cast her out of her own clan and into a life of contracts and cold camps, and the particular loneliness of being feared by everyone she met. "You are not going to ask why I am here," she said, watching him over the rim of the bowl. "I know why you are here," Tobias said. "You are hungry and it is raining, and apparently I am the only fool on this coast who will feed the woman sent to kill him." He said it lightly, but there was something steady underneath it, something that told her he had thought about this, about her, more than he was letting on. "I have decided I would rather die fed and warm than starve waiting for you to make up your mind. Seems the more practical arrangement. You joke about your own death very easily, farmer. I have had 2 weeks to get used to the idea." He set down his own bowl and looked at her directly, and there was no fear in his eyes now, only a kind of quiet, searching honesty that undid her more than any blade ever had. "Why have you not done it? You could have killed me the first day. You could have killed me a dozen times since. I am not a difficult man to catch alone." Ragesh was quiet for a long moment, turning the question over the way she turned a knife, testing its edges. "I do not know," she said finally, and it was the first true thing she had said to him. "I have killed men for less reason than Corliss gave me. I have killed men I liked better than I like you. That is either a comfort or a very serious insult, and I cannot decide which." This time she did laugh, a short, rough bark of a sound that seemed to surprise them both, and Tobias Talbot smiled at her like he had won something rare and valuable, and the fire in the little stone hearth popped and settled, and outside the rain kept falling on the sea. She stayed in his barn that night in the hay loft above his old mule and told herself it was only shelter from the storm. She stayed the next night too, and the one after that, until the lie wore thin enough that even she stopped bothering to tell it. She had never known a man to speak to her the way Tobias Talbot did. Not with the wary respect the village folk of Saltmere gave orcs who came to trade, not with the outright fear most humans showed her, not with the calculated flattery of men who wanted something from her strength. He spoke to her as though she were simply a person sitting across the table, and asked her questions no one had asked in a decade, not about her scars or her strength or the fear she carried like a second skin, but about herself, what she liked, what she missed. Whether she preferred the sea or the mountains, whether she had a favorite season, whether the stew needed more salt. "You ask strange questions for a man talking to his own assassin," she told him one evening, a week into her strange, suspended stay, as she helped him mend a fence line along the cliff edge, her strength making short work of posts that would have taken him half a day alone. "You are the strangest assassin I have ever met," Tobias said, hefting a post into place while she held it steady, his hands close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of him even in the cold wind off the sea. "Most of them, I imagine, do not stay to fix a man's fence. Most farmers do not feed the assassin sent to kill them. Most farmers are smarter than I am then." He drove the post home with a mallet, wiped sweat from his brow despite the chill, and looked at her with an openness that made her chest ache in that same strange, unnamed way. "Ragesh, can I ask you something, and will you actually answer me honestly?" Her name in his mouth sounded different than it did in anyone else's, softer, like he had taken care to learn it properly. "Ask. What happened to you, before Corliss, before the contracts? You did not learn to fight like you fight, or carry yourself like you carry yourself, in some border town scrap. You were something else once." Ragesh set down the mallet she had taken from him without asking, an old habit of simply taking what needed doing, and looked out at the gray sea below the cliff, at the gulls wheeling over the harbor and the fishing boats coming in with the tide. "I was a war band captain," she said. Ironblood clan before we scattered. My own second betrayed me 8 years ago, sold my position to a rival band for coin and standing, and I was left for dead on a mountain road with 3 arrows in me and no clan to claim my body if I died. I did not die. Her jaw tightened. I decided after that clans and bands and belonging were luxuries I could no longer afford. I took contracts instead. Coin does not betray you so long as you collect it first. And has it? Tobias asked quietly. Betrayed you, I mean. Has coin kept you warm at night the way a clan did? The way people did? She did not answer that because the answer was no, and she was not yet ready to give him the satisfaction of hearing her admit it. But she let him see it in her face, just for a moment before she looked away, and Tobias Talbot did not push further. He simply reached out, slow and careful, the way a man reaches toward something wild he hopes will not bolt, and rested his hand over hers on the fence post. She let him. That, more than anything, told her how far she had already fallen. The days that followed had a rhythm to them that Ragesh had not known in years, and did not know how to name except as something dangerously close to peace. She helped him with the harvest that was coming due, the wheat heavy and gold in the fields, and found that her strength, once used only for raiding and killing, could be turned to something that grew things instead of destroying them. She hauled water in 2 buckets where he needed 4 trips. She lifted fence posts he could barely drag. She discovered, to her own quiet astonishment, that she liked the ache of honest labor in her muscles at the end of a long day, liked the smell of turned earth and cut wheat, liked sitting on the low stone wall in the evening with Tobias Talbot beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, watching the sun go down blood-red over the water. The village folk of the harbor below noticed her, of course. An orc woman could not simply appear on a human farmer's land and go unremarked in a coastal town still scarred by old wars, and the first time she walked down the cliff road at Tobias's side to help him trade fish for salt and lamp oil, the harbor went quiet the way a room goes quiet when a wolf walks in among sheep. That is the trader's orc, she heard someone mutter, not quite low enough. Come to finish what the war did not. Tobias stopped walking. He did not raise his voice, but there was a hard edge to it that Ragesh had not heard from him before, the edge of a man who had decided something and would not be moved from it. Her name is Ragesh, he said, to the dock at large, to the fishmonger and the net mender and the old harbor master who had known him since he was a boy. She has done more honest work on my land in a fortnight than half of you have done in a season, and she will be welcome on this dock for as long as she cares to walk it. Anyone with a quarrel about that can bring it to me. No one brought it to him. But Ragesh saw the way his hand had drifted, without him seeming to notice, to rest lightly against the small of her back as he said it, a gesture of claiming and protection both, and something in her that had been braced and wary for weeks finally, quietly, began to unclench. That night in the barn loft she could not sleep for thinking of it, and when she heard his footsteps on the ladder, slow and hesitant, she did not pretend to be asleep. I could not stop thinking about you, Tobias said, standing at the top of the ladder with lamp light behind him, looking suddenly younger and more uncertain than she had yet seen him. About today, the way you stood there and let them stare and said nothing, like you were used to it, like you expected it. I did not like that you expected it. I have had a long time to get used to being feared, farmer. I do not fear you. He crossed the loft and sat beside her in the hay, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through the thin barn air. I have not feared you since the first evening in my wheat field, when you could have killed me and did not, and asked me nothing about why I kept working instead of running. Do you know what that told me? Tell me. It told me you did not want to. His voice was low, rough with something that was not quite fear and not quite hope, but sat somewhere honest between the two. You have had 100 chances to leave, Ragesh. 100 chances to take Corliss's silver and go, or to simply vanish back into whatever life you had before this. You have not taken any of them. I do not think that is because you are still deciding whether to kill me. I think you decided that a long time ago, and you are only now working up the courage to decide something else instead. She could have denied it. Ironblood pride, old and stubborn, wanted her to deny it, to retreat back into the cold distance that had kept her alive and alone for 8 years. But she looked at his face in the lamplight, at the earnest, open want written plain across it, a man who had every reason to fear her and instead had only ever offered her warmth, and the old distance simply would not hold. "No," she said quietly. "I decided the first night when you offered me stew instead of running. I have simply been afraid to say it since." "Afraid of what?" "Of wanting something I do not deserve to keep." Tobias reached up, slow and careful, and touched her jaw, tracing the line of an old scar there with a gentleness that made her breath catch in her throat. "You are not a thing that gets taken from people, Ragesh Ironblood. Whatever your clan did to you, whatever your second did to you, that was them failing you, not some law of the world that says you are owed only betrayal." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I want you to stay, not to guard me from Corliss, not because you have nowhere else to go. I want you to stay because I have been alone on this coast a long time, and I did not know how alone until you walked into my wheat field with a knife in your hand, and I found myself hoping you would not use it." She kissed him first. She would think later that this was the most honest thing she had ever done, not the sparing of his life, not the weeks of staying, but this, closing the last small distance between them and claiming his mouth with a hunger that had been building since that first golden evening in the field. He made a low, startled sound against her lips, and then his hands were in her hair, careful of the tusks, careful of her, and she pulled him against her with the same certainty she had once reserved for battle, because this, too, felt like something worth fighting for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers, Tobias laughed, a shaky, wondering sound. "I have wanted to do that since the fence line." "I have wanted to do that since the stew," Ragesh admitted, and felt the last of her old, careful distance crumble away like a wall no longer needed. She did not return to the loft to sleep alone that night, and the following morning, when the sun rose gold over the wheat, Tobias Talbot woke with an orc warrior's arm heavy and warm across his chest and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, entirely unafraid of what came next. The wedding, when it came fast and fierce, the way Ragesh did everything. It was not a human ceremony, not the kind with a priest and a written contract that the village folk of the harbor might have expected. It was an old Ironblood rite, one she had not thought to ever use again, one that predated her exile and her clan's shattering, a claiming rite meant for warriors who found something worth binding themselves to for life. She told him about it on the cliff top above the harbor, 3 weeks after the night in the loft, with the whole gold sweep of the wheat field behind them and the sea crashing far below. "Among my people," she said, turning a small curved blade in her hands, old and plain, one she had carried since before her exile. "A warrior who wishes to claim a mate for life cuts her own palm and offers the wound as a binding. It says, 'I give you my strength, my blood, my protection for as long as I live.' It is not asked lightly. It is not given lightly either." "And if I said yes?" Tobias asked, though his eyes were already bright with the answer. "Then I would cut my palm and you would cut yours, and we would bind them together, and every soul on this coast would know that Ragesh Ironblood belongs to Tobias Talbot, and Tobias Talbot belongs to Ragesh Ironblood, until one of us is in the ground." She looked at him, fierce and open at once, the proud warrior and the frightened, hopeful woman both visible in her face for the first time since he had known her. "It is not a soft thing, farmer. It is not a promise easily broken. I do not want you to say yes because you think it is what I want to hear. I want you to say yes because you have thought about what it means to be claimed by an orc on a human coast, and you want it anyway." "I have thought about it," Tobias said, and took the knife from her hand without hesitation. "Every day since the fence line. Yes, Ragesh, I want to be yours. I have never wanted anything the way I want that." The cut was small and clean, and it stung, and neither of them flinched. When their palms pressed together, blood mingling, her strength and his steadiness binding into something neither war nor betrayal could easily unmake. Ragesh Ironblood felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 8 long years, and Tobias Talbot felt, for the first time in his life, entirely, thoroughly chosen. They did not tell the whole harbor at once. But word travels fast on a rocky coast where everyone's business is everyone else's business, and within a week, the whole of the fishing village knew that the fur trader had taken an orc wife, bound in blood on the cliff top, and the whole village had opinions about it. Most of those opinions were unkind at first. Ragesh had expected that. She had lived with unkindness a long time and had built calluses thick enough to bear it. What she had not expected was Tobias's fury on her behalf, quiet and immovable, the way he stood at the harbor market and told the fishmonger's wife in plain, level words that anyone who had a problem with his marriage could take their custom elsewhere, and the way, slowly, over weeks, the harbor folk began to soften, not because Tobias argued them into it, but because they watched Ragesh haul nets alongside the fishermen when a boat came in short-handed. Watched her carry 2 men's worth of cargo up from the docks without complaint, watched her sit beside old widow Hask on the porch some evenings, and listen to the old woman's stories with a patience none of the widow's own grandchildren showed her any more. Trust, Ragesh learned, could be earned the same slow, patient way a field was earned from stubborn soil, not all at once, but stalk by stalk, season by season. It was into this fragile, hard-won peace that the past came looking for her. The first sign was small. A stranger in the harbor tavern one evening, asking too many careful questions about the fur trader on the hill and the orc woman who shared his bed, paying for his ale in coin too fine for a fisherman to carry. Tobias mentioned it to Ragesh almost in passing over supper and watched her face go very still and very cold. "Describe him," she said. "Tall, scarred across one eye. Wore his hair in the warrior braids like yours but shorter like he had cut them recently. Spoke our tongue well but with an accent I could not place." Ragesh set down her spoon slowly. "Karn," she said, and the name came out of her like something bitter and long buried. "That is Karn Deathwhisper. He was my second. He is the one who sold my position to the Skullren clan 8 years ago and left me for dead on the mountain road. He is here. He is hunting me." Ragesh rose from the table and Tobias saw, for the first time since the night in the wheat field, the warband captain she had once been, every line of her body drawn tight and dangerous, eyes scanning the dark windows of the cottage like a woman assessing a battlefield. "Karn does not forget old debts, and he does not forgive them either. If he has found me on this coast, it is not by chance, and he will not have come alone. Why would he come at all? You have been gone from your clan 8 years. "Because I am still Ironblood," she said, "and there are those among the scattered bands who would pay very well for my head, or for my loyalty returned to them by force. Karn was never loyal to anyone but the highest bidder. If someone has offered enough silver for me, he will not stop hunting until he collects it, or until he is dead." Tobias reached across the table and took her hand, the scarred palm that had bound itself to his own weeks before. "Then we face him together. I did not marry a woman to watch her fight her old war alone while I hide in the cellar. You do not understand what he is capable of, Tobias." "I understand what you are capable of," he said, steady and sure, "and I understand that whatever comes for you now comes for both of us. That was the whole of the right, was it not? Your strength and mine bound together. I do not intend to let you carry this alone simply because it frightens me." Ragesh looked at him for a long moment, at the stubborn, steady set of his jaw, and felt something in her chest ache with a fierce and grateful love she had never expected to feel again after the betrayal on the mountain road. "You are either the bravest man I have ever known," she said, "or the greatest fool." "I have been told both by better judges than you," Tobias said, and the ghost of a smile passed between them even in the shadow of the danger closing in. They did not have long to wait. 3 nights later, the harvest festival came to the fishing village, as it did every year at the turn of the season. The whole harbor strung with lanterns, tables set up along the docks groaning with fish stew and fresh bread, and the last of the season's fruit, fiddles playing somewhere near the net sheds. Half the coast come down from their farms and up from their boats to celebrate the wheat brought in and the nets still full. Tobias's harvest, the wheat Ragesh had helped bring in stalk by stalk over the long weeks of her strange, suspended stay, sat in golden sacks stacked along the harbor wall, waiting to be blessed by the old customs before the winter storms came. It was, Ragesh would think later, exactly the kind of gathering a man like Karn Deathwhisper would choose for an ambush crowded, chaotic, full of witnesses who would scatter rather than fight, full of confusion in which a knife could find a throat before anyone understood what was happening. She felt it before she saw it, the old battle instinct prickling up the back of her neck as she stood beside Tobias near the lantern-strung tables, a horn cup of harvest ale in her hand, watching the fiddler's bow fly across the strings. She set the cup down without a word and put herself, without seeming to think about it, between Tobias and the dark tree line beyond the harbor wall. Ragesh. Someone is here, she said quietly. Do not run. Stay close to me. The lanterns swung on their lines in a gust of wind off the sea, and out of the shadows beyond the wheat sacks came Karn Deathwhisper, tall and scarred, flanked by 3 other orcs in raider leathers, and the whole harvest festival went silent and still, fiddle music dying mid-note, mothers pulling children back from the tables, fishermen reaching for gutting knives that would do little against warriors like these. Ragesh Ironblood, Karn said, and his voice carried across the sudden hush of the harbor like a blade drawn from a sheath. I had heard rumors you had gone soft on some human farm, but I did not believe them until I saw it with my own eyes. A warband captain playing at wheat and fences. His gaze slid to Tobias, contemptuous and cold. Is this him, the little farmer you have traded your pride for? Say what you came to say, Karn. Ragesh's hand had found the hilt of the curved blade at her hip, the same blade she had used to bind herself to Tobias weeks before. You did not cross half a continent to insult my choices. Who is paying you this time? The Skullrend elders never forgave you for surviving what I left you for dead on that mountain, Karn said, and there was something almost like respect buried under the contempt in his voice. They want your head as proof that Ironblood pride does not go unpunished. I am simply the one collecting the debt. You will have to collect it from me then, not from him. Ragesh stepped fully in front of Tobias now, blade drawn, and the crowd of villagers pulled back further, torches and lantern light throwing long, wild shadows across the harbor stones. He has no part in this quarrel. Karn's eyes flicked to Tobias again, calculating, cruel. Does he not? An Ironblood claiming right binds 2 lives as one. Kill the farmer and the Skullrend elders will call the debt paid in spirit, even if your own head still sits on your shoulders. It seems a fair trade to me, perhaps easier even. You always were troublesome to kill outright. He moved fast-orc fast, raider fast, a blur of leather and steel that closed the distance to Tobias before most of the watching crowd had even registered the threat. And it was only because Ragesh had spent 8 years surviving exactly this kind of ambush that she was faster still. She caught Karn's blade on her own with a clang that rang out over the harbor, close enough that Tobias felt the wind of the blow pass his cheek, and shoved her old second back with a snarl that silenced whatever screams had begun to rise from the crowd. Get back, she snapped at Tobias, not taking her eyes from Karn. Get the villagers back from the lanterns. But there was no time. One of Karn's raiders, moving to flank her while she held Karn's blade locked with her own, put a torch to the nearest wheat sack stacked along the harbor wall, dry harvest grain, oilcloth sacking, all of it catching with a roar that sent flame leaping up into the night sky, sparks scattering onto the wooden net sheds beside it. And within moments the fire had caught the tarred ropes and dry timber of the sheds themselves. The harvest festival dissolved into chaos, villagers screaming and scattering, fire licking hungrily along the harbor wall toward the fishing boats moored at the dock, toward the crowd of children and elders who had been sitting nearest the wheat only moments before. "The sheds!" someone screamed. "The children are still by the sheds." Ragesh's head snapped toward the sound, and she saw them, 3 small children, the harbor master's youngest among them, trapped between the spreading fire and the water's edge, too frightened to run past the flames, too small to jump the burning netting that had collapsed across their only path back to safety. The fire was climbing fast, feeding on tar and rope and dry wood, and the heat of it was already a wall no grown villager dared cross. She made her choice in less than a heartbeat, the same way she had once made choices on battlefields, fast and absolute. "Tobias Karn is yours to keep clear of, nothing more. Do you understand me? Stay low, stay behind the water barrels." And then she was running, not away from the fire but into it, shouldering past a raider who tried to bar her path with a blow that would have staggered a lesser woman, orc strength and 8 years of hard-won survival driving her through smoke and heat toward the trapped children. Tobias had never in his life seen anything like it, and he would never, for the rest of his life, forget it. Ragesh Ironblood strode into a wall of fire like it was nothing more than a hard rain, her leather armor scorching, her dark hair whipping in the superheated wind, and scooped up all 3 screaming children in one sweep of her powerful arms, shielding their small bodies with her own as a burning length of net collapsed down across the path behind her. She turned, found the gap in the flame where the wind had briefly parted the smoke, and drove through it with the children clutched against her chest, emerging onto the harbor stones in a stagger of smoke and cinders, to a chorus of relieved, disbelieving screams from the crowd. She set the children down into their sobbing mother's arms, and turned back toward the fire toward Tobias, still fighting to keep clear of Karn's blade near the water barrels, his own shirt smoking at one shoulder where a spark had caught it, a raider closing on him from the flank with an axe raised high. Ragesh did not think. She threw herself across the burning distance between them, catching the axe blow on her forearm guard with a crack of leather and bone-deep force, and drove her curved blade up under the raider's ribs with the same merciless precision that had once made her feared across 3 clans. The raider fell. She spun, already searching for Karn, already searching for Tobias, and found him standing, whole, breathing hard, staring at her with an expression of such raw, terrified love that it stole what little breath the smoke had left her. "Behind you!" he shouted, and she turned in time to catch Karn's blade an inch from her throat, the force of the blow driving her back a step on the smoke-slick stones. "You would truly throw your life away for a human farm," Karn snarled, pressing the attack, his blade a blur against hers. "You disgrace everything you were. I was never anything worth being until now." Ragesh met his next blow and turned it aside, found an opening, and drove her knee into his ribs with enough force to send him staggering back toward the burning wheat sacks. "You left me for dead on a mountain, Karn. You do not get to tell me what I have become since." He came at her once more, wild with fury and desperation, and this time Tobias moved, not to fight, for he had no weapon and no skill for it, but to act, seizing one of the harbor's water barrels used to douse the nets, and heaving it with every ounce of strength his farmer's arms possessed directly into Karn's path. Karn stumbled through the spilled water, footing lost on the wet, smoke-slick stones, and Ragesh's blade found him before he could recover, ending the debt 8 years old in a single, decisive stroke. The remaining raiders, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled into the dark beyond the harbor wall, and the village, at last, turned its attention to the fire still climbing the net sheds, a bucket chain forming with a speed born of pure survival instinct, villager and fisherman and farmer alike passing seawater hand to hand until the flames hissed and died into smoking ruin. It was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Ragesh stood amid the wreckage of the harvest festival, blade still in her hand, chest heaving, and watched Tobias Talbot limp toward her through the smoke with his shoulder scorched, and his eyes wet with something that was not smoke at all, and neither of them said a word before he simply pulled her into his arms, heedless of the blood and ash on her armor, and held on like a man who had nearly lost everything and could not yet quite believe he had not. "You ran into the fire," he said, muffled against her shoulder. "You ran into the fire for children who were not even yours." "They were someone's," Ragesh said simply, her voice rough with smoke, "and I could reach them. I did not think about anything else. You could have died. I did not." She pulled back just enough to look at him, at the scorch on his shoulder, at the exhaustion and fear and fierce, undimmed love written plain across his face. "You threw a water barrel at a trained raider's feet, farmer. You have never fought in your life." "I did not think about anything else either," Tobias said, and something in the shared absurdity of it, the two of them alive and smoke-stained and clinging to each other in the wreckage of a burned harvest festival, broke the tension into something almost like a laugh, raw and relieved and disbelieving. Around them, the village folk who had scattered in terror now gathered slowly back, staring not with the old wary distrust but with something new. The harbor master cradling his youngest daughter, tears streaking through soot on his face. The old fishmonger's wife who had once muttered about the trader's orc now simply standing, hand pressed to her mouth, watching Ragesh Ironblood with an expression of pure, humbled gratitude. "She saved my girl," the harbor master said, his voice cracking, to no one and everyone at once. "She walked into the fire and saved my girl." No one on that dock ever again spoke of Ragesh Ironblood as a monster the war had left behind. By morning, every soul on the coast knew the story, told and retold at every table, of the orc warrior who had thrown herself into a burning harbor to save 3 children who were not her own, and of the fur trader who had thrown a water barrel at a raider's feet to save the wife he loved more than his own life. In the days that followed, the harbor came together to help Tobias and Ragesh rebuild what the fire had damaged: the net sheds, a section of the harbor wall, half of the wheat sacks lost to the flame replaced from the shared stores of neighbors who, weeks before, would not have shared a table with an orc. Ragesh found herself, for the first time since the mountain road 8 years past, surrounded not by fear or suspicion, but by something achingly close to the belonging she had thought lost to her forever. "They call you Ragesh of the harbor now," Tobias told her one evening, as they sat together on the rebuilt sea wall, the last of the sunset burning gold over calm water, his hand resting easy and certain over hers. "The children ask after you by name in the market. Old Widow Hask has been telling anyone who will listen that she always said you had a good heart, which she most certainly did not, but I have stopped correcting her." "I did not do it to earn their good opinion," Ragesh said, though there was no bitterness in it now, only a kind of quiet wonder. "I know. That is exactly why they gave it to you." He turned to face her fully, his thumb brushing over the old scar on her palm where their blood had once mingled in a rite older than either of their people's quarrels. "Karn is dead. Corliss's contract died with him. There is no clan left hunting you, no debt left unpaid. You do not have to watch the tree line anymore, Ragesh. You do not have to be ready to run." "I know," she said softly, and found, to her own quiet astonishment, that she believed it. "I have not felt this settled in 8 years. I did not think I would ever feel it again." "Do you regret it?" Tobias asked, quiet and searching, the way he had once asked her about her past in a wheat field with a knife nowhere in sight. "Staying, choosing this. A human farm, a coastal village that took a long while to trust you, a marriage bound in blood instead of some grand clan ceremony. It is not the life a war band captain would have imagined for herself." Ragesh considered the question the way she considered everything, carefully, honestly, with the full weight of who she had been and who she had become. She looked out at the calm sea, at the mended net sheds and the rebuilt wall, at the wheat fields beyond the cliff where the last of the harvest still stood gold and heavy in the fading light. And then she looked at Tobias Talbot, farmer, fool, braver than any warrior she had ever known, the man who had offered her stew instead of running and had never once, in all the months since, given her reason to regret staying. "I was sent here to end a farmer's life," she said. "I stayed for the harvest instead. I do not think there is a version of my old life, full of coin and contracts and cold camps, that could ever be worth more to me than this one." She turned her hand in his, palm to palm, scar to scar, the old binding still visible in the fading light. "No, Tobias Talbot, I do not regret it. I would make the same choice again, in that field with the knife already in my hand, 1,000 times over." He kissed her then, slow and certain, with none of the desperate hunger of the night in the loft but something deeper and steadier. The kind of kiss that came from months of choosing each other again and again, through fear and fire and old ghosts finally laid to rest. When they broke apart, the sun had nearly set, and the harbor below them glowed with lantern light, fishing boats coming in with the evening tide, children's laughter carrying up the cliff road on the salt wind. "Come," Tobias said, rising and offering her his hand, the same hand that had once held a mallet and a water barrel, and before that a bowl of stew for a stranger with a knife. "The wheat still needs bringing in before the frost. I could use the help of a strong woman who does not mind honest work." "I have been told I am very good at honest work," Ragesh said, rising to her full height beside him, 7 feet of scarred, powerful, thoroughly chosen woman standing easy and unafraid on a coast that had once feared her and now, at last, called her home. "Lead the way, farmer. I have a harvest to finish." They walked together down from the cliff top, past the mended wall and the rebuilt sheds, past neighbors who called out greetings instead of warnings, down into a village that had learned, the hard way and the true way, that the fiercest hearts often hide behind the fiercest reputations, and that love, once it takes root, grows as stubborn and unstoppable as wheat in good soil. Behind them, the sea kept its old rhythm against the rocks, patient and eternal, and ahead of them lay a harvest, and a home, and a whole long life neither of them had ever expected to find, walking hand in scarred hand into whatever came next, free at last of old debts and old fears, needing nothing more from the world than each other, and the steady, golden fields still waiting to be brought in before the frost.